So you think you'd like to retire early, but you're not 100% sure of all the factors involved? Well, stay tuned this week's episode of the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. Welcome to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm David Scranton, here with my good friend and co-host, Sarah Samuels. And today, we're going to talk about that decision. Should you retire early? If so, what are all the pros and what are all the cons, the things that you need to know? Or conversely, if you decide to retire late, what does that mean for you also?
Dave, it's great to be here with you and, of course, with all of our listeners. And I think for a lot of people out there that the goal is really to retire early. In fact, Dave, you're looking a little tanner. I think you and some of our advisors were living that retirement life over last weekend, right, down in the Bahamas.
Yeah, we had a great little Founders Club study group over the course of 4 days. And I was actually teasing them because I was actually having fun. And I flew some of them over here from Florida on the plane. And I was going to fly them back. And I said, you know what? I think I'm going to put the airplane for sale. I'm staying here. I'm not going back. You guys better get commercial flights.
Hey, good luck. You're right.
Of course I didn't. I came back. But it is nice. And that's what we always tell people, Sarah, as you know, to practice retirement, do different things and take time off and see what it's really like so that when you go to retire, you know what retirement actually will look like for you. And one of my things might be spending more time in the Bahamas. But it was good.
Spending more time on the boat fishing, right?
That's right.
And I think a lot of people, though, Dave, they dream of retiring early, but they really haven't considered that there are potential pitfalls if you're looking to leave the workforce early.
Well, first of all, you have to have started saving and investing really early, as you have, if you want to make it work, because time value of money, right? If you don't start till you're 40, well, by age 70, you've got 30 years. If you start when you're 20, you have 30 years, and by the time you're 50. So your money has to have time to grow, to get ahead of itself. And then there's other factors, right? The earlier you retire, the longer you live, which means the more you have to endure inflation. Maybe you take Social Security. You can't take Social Security. You have to spend down more principal, or you get less from it. So again, lots of factors, and most of it has to do with just not having as much time to invest money or to keep your money invested to grow. To get to where you'd like it to be.
Yeah, that compounding interest makes a huge difference over time. Well, we want to ask all of our listeners to please give us a call if you have a question about retiring early, retiring late. The phone number for the Ask Dave hotline is 800-822-1111. And if we use your question on a future episode of the show, we'll make sure you get a copy of Dave's Amazon bestseller, The Retirement Income Source, the ultimate guide to eternal income. And thank you to Debbie in Connecticut who called and left us a voicemail. Debbie says, my husband is pushing really hard to retire early. So what do we need to be aware of?
All right, Debbie. Well, I don't know what early really means. She didn't say how old she was or what.
No, she didn't mention that. No.
So we don't really know how old you are, Debbie. And that's all right. You can't answer me now. But, if you want to retire, let's say in the early 60s, 62, 63, 64, well, then you're going to get Social Security benefits. They're just going to be less. And now you have to plan for a lower Social Security benefit. Let's say instead you want to retire late 50s. Let's call it age 57. Well, now there's a 5-year gap where you can't get any Social Security from 57 to 62. So now you've got to be able to have enough income or take money out of principal to fund that first 5 years of retirement before Social Security kicks in. Also, if one of you has a defined benefit pension plan, one of those old-fashioned types of pensions where you get income guaranteed for the rest of your life, many of those pensions, the income from which doesn't kick in that young of an age. So you have to find out about from the plan document, if you have such a pension, when it kicks in, and then determine your Social Security. How big is that gap? How much is the reduction if I retire at 62 or 3 versus 67? And then if you retire even before that, how big is that gap? But there's more than that, because then there's medical insurance, right? You get on Medicare at age 65. So if you retire before 65, you've got to be able to private pay for insurance for those years. And that gets factored in also. You have to make sure you maximize income from your investments. So let's say you try to squeeze every penny out of your investments and you said, we can get 6% income. Take the amount of money you have in retirement investments, multiply it by 0.06, and say, can we live off that? Or can we live off that plus Social Security once Social Security kicks in? If the answer is yes, then maybe you can retire early. If the answer is no, then, go back to your husband and say, okay, are you willing to work part-time? Because the trade-off, Debbie, might be that, he can work a few more years and retire completely versus retiring early and then have to work part-time for a good portion of his retirement. And he may choose the latter, but he also might choose the former. He might say, you know what, I'd rather work a few more years full-time and let that money just percolate and grow and let Social Security benefits accrue so that when I finally do retire, I could retire 100%. So those are the factors to consider, and that's the conversation I would have with them.
Debbie, thank you so much for calling the Ask Dave hotline and leaving us a voicemail with your question for the show. We'll make sure you get a copy of Dave's book. Again, that phone number is 800, that's 800-822-1111. Please call and leave a voicemail with your name and number and your question for the show. And if we use your question on a future show, we'll make sure you get a copy of the Retirement Income Source, the ultimate guide to eternal income. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton. And if you've been dreaming of retiring early and what that would look like, well, you might want to wake up and pay attention to the show, because it's not all roses and unicorns out there, right, Dave? There are some potential pitfalls, including potentially less Social Security benefits, having private insurance, covering medical expenses until 65. So what else do people need to know, Dave, if they're considering retiring early?
Well, it's interesting because it's a whole movement. There's an acronym for it, FIRE or something
I've heard of
like
that, right? Yes.
which is Financially Independent Retire Early, I think.
Yes. And I believe that's geared towards people really in their 30s and 40s, even
Right.
younger than people that, our audience really that we speak to every day.
And what brings the FIRE movement on is the crypto and all that, all the crypto millionaires. So they get excited. And if crypto holds and continues to grow, maybe, they can retire early. But for most of our listeners, retiring early means retiring maybe before age 62, maybe retiring after age 55. Most people, aren't going to look to retire any younger than that because they want to have a good lifestyle in retirement.
Right. You want to have enough time to have had allowed your investments to grow, and then you can turn that into income generation when you're retired.
Yeah, and for many, what I said to Deb, I think is important because you can retire early and have less money and then have to work part-time. But now because you picked up medical costs and because you've gotten less from Social Security, you need to work part-time maybe all the way into or through your 70s. And that may be fine. I have a friend who is turning 80 this year, and he works part-time at a golf course, and he makes a few bucks, and he gets to play free golf, and he loves it. Life is good. And that may be a choice people make. But there's other people who say, gosh, if I could work 5 more years full-time and then not have to work part-time for the next 20, I'd rather do that. So it always goes back to, as we always talk about, Sarah, what you want retirement to look like. It's the Bahamas trip, right? Is that what you want? Do you want to spend a month or two there every winter? Do you want to go to the mountains for a summer or to the shore in the summertime up somewhere in the Northeast? Or, if those are things that you want and you are moving toward a retirement that you've dreamt about, then maybe working part-time will get in your way. Working part-time means you can't do all the things you want. So it kind of defeats the purpose of retiring in the first place. But if you're just somebody who's leaving because maybe you don't like your work anymore, because you don't like your boss, then okay, maybe leaving and retiring early and working part-time won't be a detriment to your retirement goals.
Well, Dave, you mentioned your friend who's in his 70s and he's still working. And there are a lot of business owners out there that my dad, he's in his early 70s and he's still working. So what if you're one of those people and you're looking to retire later in life? We'll share some tips and things that you need to know coming up. I'm Sarah Samuels, and I'm here with David Scranton, and you're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. Thank you for spending some time here with us this weekend on the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and today we're talking about this idea of retiring early versus retiring late. And a lot of people, they dream of retiring early. They make it a goal, but there are a lot of pitfalls, including less Social Security benefits, less time for your investments to grow, which means potentially less income generation, funding your own healthcare expenses, at least until Medicare kicks in. But Dave, what about the other side of the equation, right? People that maybe own their own business, they love what they do, they're looking to stay in the workforce a little bit longer and actually retire later.
Well, there are lots of benefits to that too. because people are living longer and longer. And the reason, the Social Security full retirement age was age 65 for years. It's 67 now, but the reason it was 65 was because, the average life expectancy was 67. So the idea was you have to retire at some point or you're just going to die in the saddle. And frankly, Social Security Administration never worried about running out of money because the average person lived for only 2 years. Well, that's all changing now. People are living to be 90, right?
Right. That's 30 years or more versus 2 years.
Right. So if you retire at 70, you have to plan for 20 years. If you retire at 50, not only do you have to deal with the issues you just mentioned, but also you have to plan for 40 years. And that's a much, much bigger difference.
And we always talk about, too, how with retirement being a longer-term liability, it can be difficult to plan that far in advance. And now you're adding another decade on top of how long you can be planning.
You always want to have a surcharge in how much income your investments are generating. Income in the form of interest and dividends, right? Because remember, like we talk about on the show all the time, you don't want to take principal. You don't want to use the 4% withdrawal rule or use the buckets of money withdrawal strategy. You want to just take your interest and dividends. So, to me, if somebody's retiring in their late 60s, it's nice if the amount of interest and dividends their portfolio is generating between that and Social Security is 20 or 30% higher than what they want today for income. In other words, they have a 20, 30% buffer. Now, they may reinvest some of that extra interest and dividend at the beginning, but they've got a buffer for inflation and home health care and everything. If you're retiring in your early mid-50s, that buffer might be 50% or 60%. So not only now do you have to fund a longer retirement, but your buffer's got to be that much bigger because you might live longer. And it's hard to hit that mark at that young age.
Yep. Well, I want to encourage all of our listeners to please call in now to the Ask Dave hotline. All you have to do is call the phone number 800-822-1111 and leave us a voicemail with your name and number and a brief question for the show. And if we use your question on a future show, we'll make sure you get a copy of Dave's book. It's an Amazon bestseller. It's Retirement Income Source, The Ultimate Guide to Eternal Income. And we actually have Howard here in Connecticut. And Howard has an interesting problem. So he says, I'm really enjoying working. I love my job, but my wife wants me to retire early so we can travel. How can I explain to her the benefits of working longer?
Aw, I wonder how long Howard's been married. Isn't that, imagine if Howard's married for like 30 plus years and his wife still wants him to retire and be home. That's pretty cool,
That's
isn't it?
the real dream, I think.
Yeah, after 30 years or so, most women are saying, no, keep working.
Please,
stay out of the
at
house.
work.
You're going to drive me crazy.
Work overtime.
Well, Howard, first of all, you sounds like you're a lucky man there that she wants you around. But let me answer your question, right? There are, we talked about the first pro is that you can save longer, you can let your money compound more. When you get over the age of 50, you could put more money in your IRAs, more money in your 401k. The contribution limits are higher. So you can save more money. Also, you let your money compound and grow longer. Plus, if you go to the end, let's say, later on, like age 70, if that's what retiring late means to you, now you get maximum Social Security benefits, which at age 70 are almost double what they are at age 62. So literally, the benefits can be double. If you have a traditional pension plan, that pension plan will continue to accrue benefits at least through age 65. So now you get a higher monthly income there. And you retire at age 70. 3 years later, your required minimum distributions from your IRAs kick in, and that's extra income. So the point is, not only can your accounts grow faster and you can put more money away, but also you're funding a shorter period. So now instead of having a 50, 60, 70% income buffer, maybe you need a 20 or 30% buffer, a little extra room just in case, and that can be sufficient. But also, if you go past 65, your Medicare kicks in. You've got that covered. You can get your Medicare supplement organized, maybe even have a plan for long-term care, right? So now when you retire, you can stay retired and not have to worry about going back in the workforce, right? Howard, I'm sure one of the things your wife wouldn't want is for you to retire and then have to go back part-time, or to feel the pressure of scrimping and saving, or knowing that she's stressing you out when she wants to do fun things with you. You want to do fun things, but you're afraid to spend the money. So the more money you have by the time you pull the trigger and finally do retire, the bigger chance you have of staying retired and retiring with the kind of goals and lifestyle that you want. So that's my best advice, Howard, for going to her. So Howard, don't be a coward. Go talk to her and tell her all the reasons why, and then have a conversation. So, and of course, if you're in poor health, that might change. That might mean something different. But assuming you're healthy, hopefully that conversation helps. Howard, thank you.
And Howard will make sure that you get your free copy of the Retirement Income Source, the ultimate guide to eternal income. And if you have a question for the show, please call the Ask Dave hotline. Leave us a voicemail with your name and number and a brief question for the show. That phone number is 800-822-1111. Thank you for spending some time here with us today on the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and we've been talking about the benefits and consequences, really, of retiring early versus retiring late. So if you retire early, you could miss out on Social Security benefits. You could miss out on your investments generating more money, so you can have more income later in life. You also have to fund your own healthcare expenses, at least until age 65. There's a lot of benefits for retiring early. Dave, you mentioned that the age for Social Security, the full retirement age is 67.
Yeah, but you still accrue benefits all the way to age 70. It goes up 8% a year, simple interest.
Right.
And, the one thing I said at the very end, and I still think it's so sweet that his wife wants Howard to retire.
Cute.
I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But the reality is that it also depends upon health. And that's why I said that at the end, because we've all heard of people that have retired at 67, died at 68, or retired at 70, died at 73. And that's not the point. You can't take your money with you. So health is a big part of it. Longevity in your family is a big part of it. And saying, hey, am I okay? Can I work longer? Now, you don't know. You can feel like you're in good health, work longer, and still keel over unexpectedly.
Yeah.
But that has to be part of the equation.
Well, there's a lot of people like Howard and his wife who want to spend more money on, typically earlier on in retirement, as opposed to maybe later on. They'll spend a little bit more money first. And that's one of really the consequences, I think, if you choose to retire early. You're going to have less money when you may actually need to withdraw that principal later if you do have those health issues, maybe later in life.
Yeah, well, you mentioned being self-employed, like your dad, less
like my
demand,
dad.
right? Yeah. To me, being self-employed, less could hey, bring on a person or two in his company and have them do some of the work so he can still own it, he can still run it, but take more time.
He does have that person. That's my sister.
There.
And my mom.
There you go. Oh, I got to be careful. He's going to try to
We got
hire
the whole
you.
factory.
Oh, hey. No, I think it's great because you can, as a business owner, you can do that and set yourself up and have your cake and eat it too. But even if you work for a company, a lot of companies, if you've been there long enough and you're important, you can go back and negotiate. Maybe you can negotiate a few more weeks off without pay and just say, hey, I want to take more time. I don't want to retire and leave you soon. I want to stay here. And if you're valuable enough and they want you to stay, maybe you can do that. So you can again, have your cake and eat it too.
Yep. So we've talked about retiring early, retiring late, but I think our viewers want to know, well, how do I figure out when it's the right time for me to retire? We'll help you answer that question. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and you're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. Welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and we're hoping that today's show will help you determine when the right time to retire. We've talked about the benefits and potential pitfalls of retiring early versus people that maybe want to stay in the workforce and retire a little later in life. So how can you really determine when is the right time for you to consider retirement?
Yeah, it's, we talk about the investments all the time, and one of the biggest things is that transition, right? First of all, before you get to retirement, you need to make that transition from being total return focused on your investment, regardless of whether that return comes from income, interest and dividends, or growth, capital appreciation, right? If you think about it early on in your life, all you want is your investments to go up in value. You don't care if it's from dividends or interest reinvested or from appreciation. You want it to go up. When you get to retirement, you want to have an income first, growth second approach, where you're focusing on maximizing interest and dividends, income first, and then growth or capital appreciation second. Now, we always talk about how you should do that 10 years out of retirement, but the reality of it is right now the markets are up. If somebody had enough money now and said, hey, I want to retire today, can I make that transition, snap my fingers? Well, probably yes, because your investments have probably done well and do so. So again, to me, Sarah, one of the most important factors, financially speaking, is, okay, if I took all my investments and I were able to generate 5 or 6% interest or dividends, is that enough? If I tack on Social Security, is that enough? Oh, I'm not getting Social Security for a few years? Well then, okay, if I spend down old principal for the next few years as a stopgap, then will I still have enough income being generated from my remaining investments to supplement Social Security to make it work? Then do I have a buffer, right? When I take the buffer on top of that, do I have that 20% buffer? Do I have that 50% buffer? Whatever I need based upon the age at which I decide to retire. So it gets harder. It gets harder because time value of money grows exponentially. So the later you start or the earlier you retire, the less time you have.
Yep. Well, it can be very difficult for people to make that decision,
Yeah.
but I hope it's not a difficult decision for you to call us and leave us your Ask Dave question on our hotline. That phone number is 800-822-1111. Leave us your question for the show, and if we use your question on a future episode, we'll make sure you get a free copy of Dave's book, The Retirement Income Source, The Ultimate Guide to Eternal Income. We have a question here from Paul, and Paul says, I'm only 49, and I'm trying to figure out if I want to retire early or stay working. What should I consider?
Paul, age 49. All right. Well, I think there's a couple of factors, and I think the biggest factor, Paul, is to really think about what you want in retirement. We talked about the money a lot today and compounding, and gosh, early retirement means less Social Security, more medical costs. But what's your retirement look like? Why are you thinking of retiring? Are you thinking of retiring because you don't like your current situation? Are you thinking of retiring because you're moving towards something that's pleasurable? Because if you're moving towards something that's pleasurable and you're retiring, let's say in your early 50s, now you want to make sure that you have enough income to stay retired, right? You want to make sure you have a buffer. This is where we take what you have, you multiply it by 5 or 6%, and say between that and Social Security, does that give me a 40, 50% buffer, extra income for the future that I may not need right away, right? Because you need that buffer to make sure you can stay retired with inflation and home health care costs and everything else. So part of it is, are you moving toward or moving away? Now, if you're moving away, and it's not just from a bad boss, it's moving away from an occupation that you don't like anymore, right? But you can't be repurposed in many places, so you're thinking, what do I do? Then maybe it's okay to retire early, knowing that you're going to work part-time for a period of time. Because for you, it may not be that you've got this great dream of retirement. Because remember, part-time work gets in the way. If people have this dream of all the travel and all this great stuff they want to do, but they have to work part-time, even if it's 2 days a week, they still don't have the flexibility they want. That's why people who are moving toward goals typically want to work a little longer to make sure they can stay retired and have the buffer. But people who are moving away because maybe their occupation is being replaced by AI or just they don't like what they do anymore. Now, if that's why you're retiring, not because you're moving towards something that you've already dreamt about for years and wanted for years, then okay, maybe it's okay if you work part-time for a longer period or do some consulting for a longer period or live on a little bit less income. In which case, you might have to be willing to downsize, right? You might be willing to say, hey, let me downsize my house. Let me get into a smaller place. Because if that's more pleasurable to you than continuing to work and living in a nicer place, well, then that's only the decision that you can make. So, Paul, good luck. Good luck making the decision. I'm sure you'll choose the right thing, whichever it is.
And Paul, we hope you enjoy your free copy of Dave's book, The Retirement Income Source, The Ultimate Guide to Eternal Income. It'll help you make that important decision. And we want all of our listeners to please call in because we love to hear from you. The Ask Dave hotline phone number is 800-822-1111. Leave us your name, your voicemail, and a brief message with your question for the show. And if we use it on the show, we'll make sure you get a free copy of Dave's book. And thank you for spending some time here with us this weekend on the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton. And determining when the right time to retire for some people, Dave, it might feel like Goldilocks, right? Where the porridge was too hot, the porridge was too cold. Should I retire early? Should I retire late? But really, how can people get it just right and know the right time that they should retire?
So it is just like Goldilocks. That's a great metaphor. And, so I think the first thing is you have to look at your life expectancy in your family. You have to look at your own health and realistically say, hey, am I a person who appears to have longevity on my side? That's a factor, right? You may want to work a little later because you might have more time in retirement. Or am I a person who everyone in my family has passed on early? Maybe I've got health issues now. So I want to get out early just because I don't want to be the one who retires and keels over the next day, right? So that's part of it. The other part of it is, do you have dreams and aspirations and things you want to do? Or are you more of a homebody, right? If you're more of a homebody, where no, I don't care. I want to hang out. I want to garden. I want to do things and not really want to travel anywhere. I don't like traveling. I don't want to leave the country. Some people say, hey, I travel so much on business that I don't want to travel when I'm retired. All right. If you live in more conservative retirement, well, that's fine too, right? But those are things you have to figure out because that goes to how much income you're going to want in retirement. And compare that to the numbers that you're able to get with the buffer factor that we talked about. And voila, that's a big part of your decision. But I'd also say that if you feel like you aren't moving towards something and you don't have anything big dream of what you want to do in retirement and you actually still like your work, then keep working. Because, Sarah, we've heard so many people talk to us about how they thought they wanted to retire. They liked their job, but they thought it was the right age, and then they were miserable, right?
They weren't moving towards something. They were moving away.
For some people, their work is their social life, right? It's their activity. So if you don't have a vision of what you're going to replace that with, but you still like your work, then keep working. It might be a big part of your life. Yeah.
It's a huge thing. Just as what you're doing before and after retirement is incredibly important, especially heading into it. You want to make sure that you can enjoy your retirement.
And for some people, again, if you're smart and you can do this, maybe you could talk to your employer and say, hey, can I pull back a little bit? I'd like to stay on. I'd like to pull back a little bit so that you get a little balance in your life. Maybe retirement's more like a rheostat than it is a light switch. And then you can get a feel, do I like this or do I want to cut back more? Nah, maybe I better not. Maybe I better stay working this number of hours. Or go to work doing some consulting. So lots of choices out there, but like Socrates says, the key is know thyself.
Yep. And you're already making the right choice by watching the show if you're thinking about retiring. So we appreciate you listening every single week to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.
And that means that we hope that you're back here with us next week, same time, same station. I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels, and this is the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.